Welcome to Popternative, where we dive into topical discussions from the worlds of pop culture, social media, and sports. Here is your host, Peter Remoliotis, aka PD Beats.
Hello and welcome to the Popternative Podcast, the podcast and talk show where we have digital discussions on the worlds of TV, film, pop culture, pro wrestling, social media, sports, music, everything really depending on the guest. We talk about it all. As always, I'm your host, Peter Remoliotis. On social media, you know me as PD Beats. My guest is a interviewer of professional wrestlers and celebrities. He's the host of the Chris Van Vliet Show, which you can catch on YouTube, and his podcast is also available wherever you listen to podcasts. We're with none other than Chris Van Vliet. Chris, welcome to Popternative, sir.
Oh, man, thank you so much for having me on.
No, absolutely. I mean, we did an Instagram Live at the beginning of quarantine, but it's great to catch up with you again, man.
Yeah, the beginning of quarantine, what was that, like 14 years ago? I feel like that's when it was, yeah.
It feels like this. And this is going to be a bit different for you, right? Because you're usually the one asking the questions.
Yeah, I'm usually the one in control, and who knows what's going to happen here.
No, absolutely. When was I want to know, we talked about on quarantine, and it's available on my YouTube, so I kind of asked you how you got started into interviewing and everything, but specifically I want to know, because people who follow your career, you started off like for people that follow you now, it's like pro wrestling is like what you kind of focus on. Before that, it wasn't like that. When did you kind of decide that it was the time to like focus on something specific like pro wrestling, Chris?
I've definitely niched in on pro wrestling, being a wrestling fan, but my main background is celebrity interviews. So that runs the gamut of, actors and musicians and authors, everything. Yep. And it honestly kind of started as an accident. So, as an entertainment reporter, you would interview all these different people. And then WWE happened to be coming to town. I was working in Vancouver at the time. Yep. I was on a show called 969, which was on the channel that ended up becoming MTV2 Canada. And I just asked my boss, I said, WWE's coming to town. Do we ever interview pro wrestlers? Is that a thing? My boss goes, yeah, that's something we've done before. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I can have the chance to interview wrestlers and get paid for it? That's honestly where it began. And I just figured if I had the access to do this, number one, like the fan inside of me is like, I can ask them the questions that I actually care about because I have the access to them. And it just kind of turned into like wherever I was working, whatever TV station I was on, I would just be like, can we talk to wrestlers? It got to a point though, one time where my boss was like, Chris, we've had like 6 wrestlers on in the last 4 months.
Let's switch it up a bit. Let's
dial it back on the wrestlers a little bit.
Absolutely.
So that's really where it began.
Absolutely. And you're interviewing wrestlers from WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling. Like you're interviewing them all, and and what I really like is everyone kind of has a story. Everyone kind of has different stories from different points of the wrestling career, and you kind of touch on a lot of those different kind of eras.
And I think the thing that I really like to do with my interviews is I like to dive deep. Like anyone who's a high achiever, anyone who's doing something at the top level, like all these people are, they're doing it because they got something special inside of them. Absolutely. And I try to kind of just go beyond scratching the surface of their career and try to figure out like, what was it that made you do this? Like you talked to someone, I just did an interview with Eric Young recently, and he says like, I was going to be a pro wrestler no matter what. Yeah. And I love those stories. And you hear it in every profession. I was going to be an Olympic athlete. I was going to be an NFL player. I was going to be an actor, whatever it is. And they decided early on, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to find a way to. And I love hearing those stories.
For me, I kind of knew when I was younger, I was going to work in sports and entertainment. And I do, with my podcast entertainment and with my day job working in hockey, I do. Like I knew, what you're going to work in, what you're going to do.
Not everyone has that though. No. I think there's a lot of people that are, still in their 20s, 30s, hell, even their 40s and 50s that still don't know what they want to do for a living or still are going to a job that they hate every day. And I had an epiphany. My final year of college, I remember waking up one day and going, oh my God, when I graduate, this is all coming to an end. Like I was at Wilfrid Laurier University. I loved going to college. I lived with 4 of my best friends. And I just remember waking up one day and going, when this ends, when I graduate, like I got to work for the rest of my life, for the next 40, 50 years of my life. And it was in that moment when I decided I don't want to hate my job every single day. And I always loved broadcasting. I always loved performing. And was in that moment I decided I'm going to do this thing. Yeah. And if I don't succeed, at least I can look back and go, I tried my hardest and it didn't work out.
I know. It's just like, that's the one thing too that I've noticed as well. I mean, like, people that kind of watch your YouTube videos, like, can tell right away that you are like a fan of wrestling. You are passionate about it. So I feel like that kind of adds to the genuine ass feeling of the interview. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And thank you for saying that. But I also think that, like, I'd like to say, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I'd like to think I'm not marking out too much, which I also think like adds like a really genuine aspect to these interviews.
Well, I think what was really cool is when you interviewed Johnny Gargano, like the hotel room, when he did show like you the title and stuff, like, you're gonna like, you kept your composure, but like, that was cool. You know what I mean?
It was cool. It was, and also like, me and Johnny go way back. Like, I was a ring announcer for him in Cleveland, Ohio. Like, we go way back. So to be able to sit in his hotel room, like on WrestleMania weekend, and hold the NXT championship, it was like number one, like, a little bit. Yeah, but it was also like, number one, I'm holding the NXT championship, but number two, I'm with my friend Johnny here.
Yeah.
And he's done this thing that he said he was going to do.
Absolutely. You record these interviews, you ask these questions, you're doing the interview. Then you edit this interview, and then you put the interviews on your channels.
Yeah.
When do you know? Is it like after, when you play it back, or is it while you're interviewing where you're like, man, this is going to be a good interview? Like, my fans are going to eat this up. When do you know exactly when that feeling is?
Like, as it's happening. Yeah. Like, usually, like, you get either they'll bring something up that you didn't expect them to bring up, or they'll start to tell you a story and you're like, oh man, like, this is good stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
That's usually it. But there's oftentimes when I'm editing it and I go, oh, I didn't catch it first. Yeah, because you're so you're into the conversation, but you're not listening to it as a piece of content. You're listening to it as a conversation. Like, you know, if you and I had a chat at a party tonight and we hung out and had beers for an hour, I wouldn't be able to tell you all 15 topics that we talked about.
No.
But I'd be able to pick out like one or two. But, you know, if later on you went, do you remember when I told you that thing? I'd go, oh yeah, that was a really good story.
No, absolutely. The focus big time before quarantine was obviously like the Wednesday night, the NXT versus AEW, the WWE versus AEW. Because of quarantine, there were some companies that let go wrestlers. WWE released wrestlers, and those wrestlers had opportunities to sign with other companies. One company that, got a lot of talent from that was Impact Wrestling. And I feel like it's interesting because they kind of like were back in the fold a little bit. Like the last couple of shows they've been doing, like, people are talking about them a lot.
Impact Wrestling they're putting out some great stuff. And I feel like we're going to look back on this in 6 months, a year, 2 years, and look at Slammiversary as kind of that turning point. No, I didn't mean turning, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's going to be that turning point where we're going to look at Slammiversary and go, things really changed. And I just wish that Impact was available on a channel that everybody got and everybody knew where to find. And this is not a knock on Access. Access is readily available in a lot of households, but people don't know it as well as the USA Network, as well as TNT. And I just think that it's a little bit unfortunate because Impact Wrestling is having some of their best matches, some of their best writing, some of their best storylines that they've had, I'd say, since the TNA days.
For sure. And I have to give a shout out to a friend of yours, Eric Young. And I just want to give a shout out quickly to I'm a big metal and hardcore music fan, right? I just want to just shout out to his new theme song is amazing. And it's love
a great theme song.
Yeah, it's a great theme.
Yeah,
right?
it's good.
I saw you also did an interview with someone behind the music for AEW, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, Mikey Ruckus. He's the guy who's created the majority of the AEW themes. And I think what was interesting about that conversation is we peeled back the curtain a little bit to what goes into making a theme song. Yeah. And he talks about it a lot in this interview that making a theme song is very different than making a song because and I didn't even think about this, and I've been a wrestling fan my whole life. The theme song has to have the hit when are they going to come out the curtain?
Exactly.
Then there needs to be another hit for like when they're going to do their pose on the top of the ramp, and then another hit by the time they get to the ring. And I'm like, oh wow, the best theme songs have all of those things.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't like my channel from time to time. I dabble into interviewing the pro wrestlers, but it's not as focused as yours, right? But when I interviewed Ariel Monroe, now Big Swole on AEW, we definitely talked about that for a while. We talked about like the theme songs because we were talking about like Edge's theme song and like those theme songs that just kind of like as soon as you hear it, you're just like freak out, you know what I mean?
There's also some theme songs make or break a character. Like Shinsuke Nakamura is an incredible wrestler, but his theme song put him over the top and made people really take notice.
You know whose theme song I love on NXT right now?
Who?
Dakota Kai.
Oh yeah. See,
You know
and this
what?
is it. This is what I'm talking about.
I love that theme song.
Think of Fandango.
Yeah.
And it was like, sure, he was fine. He was doing his thing. But his theme song, we just all like, we're doing it. We caught on to it.
Absolutely. They have some good stuff. It's just people, I don't think people realize that music is like a huge part of like pro wrestling. Like it is.
Oh, gosh.
It always has been. I remember I always go back sometimes and watch like Saliva's performance at the Toronto WrestleMania with the
I was
Dudley
there.
Boys. Yeah.
I was there. I remember it.
I know. It's just like, it's a big part. What are you kind of noticing now, trends in pro wrestling? But even before quarantine, I'm talking about the last like 5 years, because I don't think there's a lot of changes now because of like quarantine wrestling.
Sure.
But like, are you noticing, like, what are you noticing? Is there more high flying? Is there more like, is it more like deep storylines? Like, what have you been noticing in the last?
Well, if we're going to go deep and like talk about 5 years, I think the biggest thing has been the influence of indie wrestling. Yeah. WWE kind of pretended for the longest time that indie wrestling didn't exist. And then when an indie wrestler did show up in NXT or WWE, they would just pretend that their indie career hadn't happened and they gave him a new name.
This is a brand new wrestler. No, he's been wrestling for 10 years.
Exactly. So I think that that's the biggest shift. Like, we just talked about Johnny Gargano. He's a perfect example. If Johnny had been signed 10 years ago, he would not be Johnny Gargano. He would not be Johnny Wrestling. He would have been some completely different name and some completely different gimmick.
Yeah.
So I think WWE admitting that indie wrestling has shaped wrestling, number one. Number two, indie wrestling basically made AEW.
I'm hoping the stigma of like, not even stigma, but like like NXT being like a development league. Like, I hope that just leaves completely, in my opinion, because you have like bona fide superstars in NXT right now.
Yes, but we need to stop saying getting called up to the main roster.
Yeah, like NXT, in your interview too, Johnny Gargano said that, right? Like, NXT is main. But I think of like Karrion Kross, superstar. Adam Cole's a superstar. Keith Lee is a superstar. These are superstars. You could throw those guys in on a main event with Randy Orton or Drew McIntyre right now, and it would be a great match. I
completely agree. And there's no reason that they can't have those matches. Yeah. But the thing is, if you're the NXT champion, you're still not in that tier of the Triple H's, Randy Orton's, Ric Flair's, The Rock, the list goes on and on and on. But I appreciate that there is that chance to like make your mark, have the fans get to know you, and then go to Raw or SmackDown.
Like, I still think like one of the best things when they did the NXT Worlds Collide, when they had the whole like Undisputed Era Imperium like rivalry. I mean, that's something that we could like put all those guys in the main roster, and I would love to see that as a SmackDown storyline. You know what I mean?
Look, I'm with you, man. I think though that unfortunately the reality is there is a big difference between a WWE fan and a wrestling fan. And I say that there are people that have only watched Raw ever, or have only watched Raw and SmackDown, and that's it. And they've only gone to WWE events. There are people that watch on Monday night that have never been to an indie show. And that blows my mind. Are you a wrestling fan or are you a WWE fan? And the reality is they are a WWE fan, and that's okay. That is completely okay. But there is a whole other world of other stuff that that's out there for people to appreciate.
Absolutely. I want to kind of get into like the more like educational aspect of this interview right now, because we're both we're both YouTubers. You know, we've been doing this for a good amount of time. You've been doing this for like, you've been interviewing people for like 15 years, which is crazy. But like, here's the thing. You put this YouTube channel together, you interviewed people, you experimented, you kind of, in terms of your questions, in terms of your style of interviewing, you kind of, you know, knew what worked, you knew what didn't, right? Is your advice for up and coming YouTubers kind of like that? Like, kind of do what works for you? If there's a certain kind of, like, I mean, I don't feel like there's more to say, right? Like, do what works. Do what works based on the numbers, the viewer, you know what I mean?
I would say start with do what you like.
Yeah.
So just do what you like, put it out there and do the content that you like.
Yeah.
Your audience will start to tell you if they also like it. And it'll be very obvious based on your views, based on the shares, if they like it as well. Yeah. So I still experiment. I still experiment with lots of different stuff. And the whole reason that I experiment with the style of questioning that I have is because in my broadcasting career, I would do a 5 or 10 or 15-minute interview, knowing we would only air 1 or 2 segments from that, like 30 seconds maybe from it. So I would go into these interviews and I would swing for the fences. Yeah. And I would ask a question not knowing how it would be received. And if it didn't go well, oh, well, we would just not air it and that'd be fine. Absolutely. So I remember specifically asking Ben Affleck, and no one had asked him this, what he thought of the bat flick term. Remember when people were taking Ben Affleck and Batman, putting it together, bat flick? And I'm like, I'm going to ask him this. Why not? Let's see what he says. And if he doesn't like it, we just won't use it. So I figure swing for the fences. If it doesn't work, you'll find out real quick.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's also too, like, I'm sure you look like, as you do this, like, this is for me, but I'm wondering if you do this. Like, I'll notice like certain, so I don't only interview wrestlers, right? So I'll interview, if I do an interview from a TV show, right? Like, for example, my interviews with Letterkenny cast members do very well on my channel.
Great.
So
yeah.
when I try to get as many Letterkenny interviews as possible.
Of course.
Do you get into those moods where like you post a few like NXT interviews that really did well? And you're like, man, I got to get more NXT interviews. Has that ever happened to you too? I try
to do a lot of different things.
Oh, absolutely.
But I will say that last year, there was a lot of people that were like, you're interviewing too many AEW people. And I'm like, well, I'm interviewing a lot of AEW people because they're giving me the access to do it. Yeah. You know, I'll interview anybody. I'll interview Ring of Honor, Impact, WWE, New Japan, whoever. I want to have conversations with people that I find interesting. And more importantly, people that our audience can learn from. That's the biggest thing. Like in the last few weeks, I interviewed UFC legend Vitor Belfort. I interviewed one of the greatest bodybuilders of all time, Mike O'Hearn. And I just think that they're fascinating conversations that if you're looking to grow as a human, listen in on these conversations. And I think you can take a little bit from these people who are excelling. These are the people who are the uncommon men among uncommon men.
Yeah, but I feel like it also starts where like your YouTube channel is the perfect example of like hard work, grinding, and networking, where people are going to kind of message you and be like, Chris, like, how are you getting all these interviews? And it's like, well, you know what? Get out there, intern, meet people, get involved. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that, you know, maybe people just started noticing my channel over the last year or two, but I started my channel in February of 2011. And sure, I was putting out interviews kind of here and there. It was just sparse. It was very sporadic. But I think that people don't realize that it's hard work and it's a grind. And people start their YouTube channel and they think that like, I'm going to get one of these play buttons after like 3 months. It's like, oh, no. You are going to put in a whole bunch of work, and you're also going to find interesting ways to make these interviews happen. And you're going to find interesting ways to allow people to know that these interviews exist.
Was that for subscribers or views?
This is for subscribers.
So how much was that? Was that when you hit 100K?
This is 100,000. The next benchmark is 1 million when you get the gold play button. So at this rate, it's like, 20 years away.
I'm at 1,500, but I'm like very happy with that.
You should be happy with that. And you're growing every single day.
It's crazy. Like I'm going we're not going down subs,
no.
Which is like cool to me. You know what I mean? Like we keep going up every day.
And like you said, you're going to get a few of those interviews that hit, and people are going to go, oh, this is the Letterkenny guy. Yeah. This is going to be good.
Outer Banks was the one for me. Outer Banks was a show that was posted like right in the beginning of quarantine, and it was kind of like the new age Dawson's Creek OC, like teen hit drama.
Yeah.
And like 3 of my episodes got like over 40,000 views.
Huge. Yeah. And that's the thing. You took some chances, because a lot of people would look at that and go, I've never heard of this show. Why would I do these interviews?
Yeah.
You went, this could be interesting.
Sometimes you kind of have an idea though, because you kind of look at the timing and you kind of look at what it is and you look at a trailer. Like, have you ever watched a trailer for something and you said like, there's a good chance that this is going to be a hit? Like,
yeah, of course. I did it yesterday. I watched the Batman trailer and went, this is going to be awesome.
Dude, it looks so good.
I'm so proud of Robert Pattinson too. Yeah. I don't know him well. I've interviewed him a handful of times, especially for the Twilight movies, but I'm so proud of him. Like, he has 2 incredible movies coming out in the next handful of months. Yep. Tenet, of course, is going to be amazing. And then the Batman.
Yep. I mean, it's amazing. I wonder, like, I was talking to like my parents about this, why they called it the Batman and not just Batman.
Well, think about it. Think about when you watch the Nolan films, he was the Batman.
Yeah, he was. I have not posted it yet, but my interview with Burt Ward, who played Robin in the 1960s Batman, I can't wait to post that one.
You got to post this thing.
Dude, he got into it. He got into it.
Oh, I love that.
Like, you know, he had the first ever cinematic fight with Bruce Lee, like ever.
I had no idea.
Yeah, Bruce Lee versus Kato. That was the first ever Bruce Lee cinematic fight.
So let me ask you this, even though, I'm the one who's supposed to be answering the question.
I like this. You're asking me a question. All right.
How do you get Burt Ward is, that's a legend. How do you get an interview like that?
So what I basically do is the standard, you send emails out, but you have to understand that people are getting email and press requests all the time. All the time. You have to figure out a way to make it work for that specific person. You're going to kind of put in like, whether it's some people look at views, some people look at what like other people you've interviewed. Yeah. So some people like that familiarity, right? Like I'll send like an email out to like example Eric Young, right? I'll send an email out and I'll be like, I just interviewed, 6 other NXT wrestlers, and I also interviewed Chris Van Vliet that There's a familiarity, so maybe that's gonna want them to do it. With Burt Ward, I think it was he liked the idea that I talk about a lot of really cool things, and he liked the idea that my show was basically touches on a lot of things, and he wanted to talk about his not-for-profit dog food company, Gentle Giants Dog Food.
Yeah, so, that's big.
Yeah, exactly. So he saw it. I think they saw an opportunity for a platform that allowed them to talk about not just Batman, but they could talk about that as well, because I don't just touch on geek or nerd culture. You know what I mean?
And I think the big thing that you're saying here, and I tell this to people all the time, is how do you provide value? Because I get a lot of interview pitches where people want to interview me, and all they're usually saying in their pitch is, here's how this thing's going to help me. It's like, well, yes, it's obvious how this is going to help you. You need a guest for your show, and I'm a guest. Yep. But I think it's really important to someone, if they're going to give up half an hour, maybe more of their time, you need to be able to say, here's how I can value that, and here's what I can provide for you.
Absolutely. And like I said, I think certain people will respond for certain things. Someone will look at your channel, even if you don't have as many views, and be like, I like this channel, I like the vibe, I'm going to do the interview. Some people will look at the views. Some people will look at what you talk about. I think it depends, you know what I mean?
It does, but like, whatever you're doing right now, man, it's working. So keep doing it.
I appreciate that, man. I really do. You like myself, you wear many hats, you do a lot of things. Can you talk
I'm even wearing a hat right now.
Yeah, you're wearing a hat, but I want you to talk about that hat a little bit.
Yeah, so this is something I don't talk a ton about, but I'm very passionate about bass fishing. And 4 years ago, my tournament bass fishing partner, let me just take this back a little bit. So I fish in bass fishing tournaments. I fish in Pro-Am bass fishing tournaments. My buddy and fishing partner, Aaron Anders, and I started a bass fishing company called Tungsten. There it is. Yep. We sell tungsten fishing weights for bass fishing. And man, when I love something, when I'm passionate about something, I dive all the way into it. And that's what I'm doing with this. And I'm really proud of the growth of our company. We're in all kinds of retail stores all across the country.
How long have you been doing it for?
I started in 2016. Wow. We were just named to Inc. magazine's top 500 companies of the fastest growing companies in America. And I've always had this entrepreneurial spirit in me. I was the guy with the lemonade stand. I was the kid shoveling your snow, and I was the kid cutting your grass. And now that I'm doing this on a little bit of a bigger scale, I'm really happy. And I've learned a lot about like being an entrepreneur from that. That's really helped me grow as a YouTuber. It's helped me grow as a podcaster, and it just helped me grow in life in general.
Well, I will say this, man, and I don't want to get like super, lovey-dovey right now, but I will say this, like, there's a lot of people doing YouTube. There's a lot of things, and I've known you. I think we've known each other for what, like at least I think we connected at least a year ago.
If not, I think longer. Yeah.
But like legit, like anytime I had a question about something or want to talk, like you were there, you answered it right away, and that man is like you can't put like a value price on that. Like, that's amazing. Oh. So thank you for being like that.
Of course. I mean, I would expect the same thing from someone else in return. So, I'm happy to help because people have always helped me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's important too. But I feel like it is a competitive world. I feel like it is like the podcast world is very competitive.
Yeah. And it's funny, I definitely did not create, the idea of interviewing wrestlers at all, but it's so cool to see that there's other people out there that are doing the same type of thing. And it's cool that, people have come to me for advice, or man, the amount of messages that I've got from people going, I saw that you were doing this and it made me realize that I could do this too. And I'm like, yes, of course. Anyone can do this.
What you're doing right now, like you said, you experimented and stuff, but like I look at your channel right now and the way you have it with the teasers, with the clip in the beginning before the episode starts, like what you have right now. And I know we're all like perfectionists. We always want to try to change things. I get it. But like, it's like, I wouldn't change anything right now. The way you're putting it out is awesome.
Maybe today, but YouTube is consistently and constantly changing. So I will always be.
But you know what I mean though? Like I think what you have, your product right now is perfect. Like is great.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. Thank you. I know I'm going to keep working at this and trying to make this better and better and better. And a lot of my focus now is on my podcast. And I think a lot of people might recognize my face or my voice from my YouTube videos, but I also want people to know that like the audio of those interviews is available on the podcast.
Absolutely. So can you plug away? Like do all the plugs.
Well, wherever you're listening to this, you can find me, Chris Van Vliet, VanVliet. And that's where you can find me everywhere. But I love radio, and podcasting is like radio, but done better. And that's nothing against radio, but like radio's cool, except every 8 to 9 minutes, you have to take a break and throw to a commercial. Like the fact that Joe Rogan can talk for 4 hours straight without any interruption, without even bathroom breaks. Like, does that man have a catheter under the table? It's unbelievable.
It's crazy. He just goes and goes. It's nuts.
So I just feel like we're in a new world now. And the era that I started in broadcasting was 2005. Actually, 2004 was my very first radio job. I was a board operator at AM 570 News in Kitchener, Ontario. That was my first job. And broadcasting has changed so much. So much so that I would like to say that broadcasting as we knew it is dead. The word broadcasting is not broad anymore. It's the exact opposite. Broadcasting is dead and niche casting is the thing now. Like if you're into pro wrestling, if you're into pro wrestling and you turn on the TV right now, you are not going to see broadcasting, or you're not going to see wrestling because it's just not there. But if you pick up this thing that sits in your pocket all day long, you can watch wrestling till the end of eternity because it's there.
It is crazy. No, the times have changed. Like you said, broadcasting has changed, but it's just nuts. But you know what, man? I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed this conversation, man.
Yeah, man. Thank you. And keep doing what you're doing, man.
Absolutely. And again, people could follow you at
Chris Van Vliet.
Perfect. And it's one of those things where they follow you, they can kind of see everything going on. If they see you on Instagram, they'll see all your links as well, right?
You'll see it all, and you'll see that you'll see some bass fishing photos, you'll see some workout photos. I've been doing a lot of hiking now that I'm in California. You'll see it all.
Absolutely. Well, seriously, thank you so much. Well, this has been Popternative, youtube.com/Popternative for previous episodes. You can also listen to the audio-only versions on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to the audio-only podcast. You can find Popternative. Until next time, this is Chris Van Vliet and Petey Beats signing off.
Thank you for tuning in to Popternative. Make sure to check out our past episodes of Popternative on YouTube. Be sure to like Popternative on Facebook and follow us on Twitter.
This has been an Autograph Communications production.